You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Cridland, Lead Optimization Strategist at digital agency Rio, and our own Sandeep Shah, Product Director here at Web Trends Optimize. In this podcast, we delve into how to get a better understanding of your users and what really makes them tick. And by focusing on the person in your personalization, you can use this to develop greater customer engagement. Morning, Sandeep. Morning, Sarah. This is quite unusual. We don't normally have two guests on our podcast, but I thought it was very relevant to have both of you on this one this morning. Before we start, perhaps, Sarah, we could just ask you just to run through your career and your kind of background in a couple of sentences or two.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for inviting me on. So I'm Sarah Cridland. I'm the lead optimization strategist for Rio Digital. So we're an agency. We look at conversion rate optimization, user research, accessibility, and design, and we also do SEO as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Sandeep, I know you for ages, but I think you were the first guest on our podcast, so perhaps it would be good if we could just get a synopsis of your background too.
Yeah, sure. I'm Sandeep, head of product at Web Trends Optimize. Been around for almost 11 years, I think, now. So, yeah, I've seen most things techie related, I think, in that time, safe to say.
Okay, that's a pretty brief intro. Thanks, Sandeep. Guys, it's difficult to believe that it's 34 years since the World Wide Web was invented, and many of our listeners will have known nothing else. But many of the pre-internet principles of customer engagement and personalisation, such as knowing your customers, their likes and dislikes, and why they're visiting, are even more relevant today. But as an industry, I think we've been talking about personalisation for many years, but it's still common to find companies that don't understand that it's the people who are behind the websites that are the most important part of the loyal customers. Sandeep, what can companies do to improve their level of customer engagement and personalisation? And what value does it bring to both the organisation and to the visitor?
Yeah, I think the first thing everyone should be doing, I guess, is thinking about people. You know, it's very easy for us to think about things in terms of technology and put a carousel over here or, that kind of thing. A lot more present in emails as well. A lot more difficult, but kind of necessary, I guess, is to start thinking about the people. A person who's come here wanting to do certain things, in need of certain things, troubled by certain things, and putting yourself in that mindset just as the initial step.
But would you put that from a perspective of, say, clicking from a Google lead, that first landing page, is that where we would normally see personalisation, or perhaps that's just pretty basic these days?
Normally, yes. I think these things are quite often just because of traffic levels. If you have a lot of traffic showing up, on a given page or a given journey, then it's very easy to run things and understand the value of what you're doing. That's kind of the basis of the whole A/B testing industry, really. So you find it much easier in that situation to personalize on those high traffic pages, which are normally entry pages, landing pages, these kind of things. But there's nothing stopping you from making a PDP more relevant, based on the type of product and the things that people are in need of knowing for specifically that type of product. If you take someone like Boots, for example, they sell quite a wide range of products. And, you probably want to understand very different things for hair gel versus suntan lotion for children,
Yeah. But what's the benefit from the user's perspective and from the organisation's perspective? Because we talk about personalisation, but personalisation can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. I think if we can understand what the value proposition is, then that might encourage more organisations to start looking at it more people-centric, if you like.
Yeah, the value proposition, I guess, is just, a lot of people are coming to a website and not converting. And the question is why? And sometimes it's things like small bits of usability on the site are not very good and the forms need improving and these kind of things. But quite often, even if you've been doing that for years, you still have a massive amount of people coming to the website who never convert. And it's looking at what are they actually in need of and addressing those problems fundamentally with messaging, as opposed to just, tweaking visual aspects of the site and trying to encourage more people down a journey.
So it's basically about trying to convert those people into buyers, potentially, so turning browsers into buyers, etc. And that's the value from the company's point of view. From the user's point of view, is it just a good feeling that they get? It's almost less about the good feeling. You can kind of do small things to make people feel good, I guess. But, from my perspective at least, it's trying to address fundamental things that they're in need of. If somebody comes to a website and let's say it's a train company and they're traveling with their children, they have very fundamental things they're in need of knowing. Table seats, for example, somewhere for the kids to put their toys up and play with. It's these kind of things they're in need of knowing and being reassured of. And if you do nothing to address them, they might keep browsing. With train tickets, I guess they're going to have to buy it, but they might not end up seeing the best experience. As long as there's a train.
Yes, of course. As long as they can get on the train. That's the first terrible experience to deal with, yes. But yeah, it's more about just, really understanding where the challenges are, as well as delighting people, so it kind of works from both angles.
So, Sarah, we kind of know what personalisation is, but how do we know what to do around personalisation, and how do we understand the user? We're trying to be able to focus today on the user experience and making it the person behind the web page. How do we find out the details of who that person is?
Well, I think the most basic place to start would be in your analytics tool. So obviously you've got a huge amount of data in there telling you, like Sandeep says, where are they coming, how are they entering the site. If a user's landing on a product page directly from Google Shopping, they're already in product browsing mode, whereas someone who comes in on the home page often tends to be an existing customer or someone who already knows you or has some kind of relationship with you as a brand. So I think trying to get an understanding of where your users are coming from, where they're landing on the site, what devices are they using, what are their typical journeys, are they using the search to find products, are they using the navigation. There's a huge amount that you can get from the analytics about who the user is and how they're behaving. But obviously the analytics research can only take you so far, so you might find out that there's a particular problem with a certain type of user, but what it's not going to tell you is why, and it's also not going to tell you what your users are thinking, what they're looking for. Like Sandeep was saying, a family with children on a trip, say, are going to have very different needs to maybe someone who's single in their 20s. They're going to have very different criteria for what makes a good product or how it's going to serve them. So this is where user research can come in, actually talking to your users. So instead of just observing what they're doing, is talking to them directly to find out what does make them tick, what are they looking for. So this is where things like user research can come in. So on a simplistic level, you could use things like surveys and polls to just ask your user. Like, for example, why are you here today? What are you looking for? What is making you want to buy this product? So like, for example, with clothes shopping, are you looking for something for an event that's coming up, or is it just everyday wear? Is it a functional purchase? Is it something you're really excited to buy? So asking the user why they're there and what they're doing, so you could get a picture of the different types of user. So you could do that quite simply with surveys and polls, but then on a higher level it would be running things like user testing, where you can sit down with actual participants, get them to navigate your site and talk through their thought process. and you can gain a huge amount of insight there into, users will often come up with things like, I really need to know about this particular bit of information about a product and I can't find it, therefore I'm not going to buy it because I need to know this. And especially if you're working on a product or service where you are not typically a customer yourself, there might be a whole other range of product information that people are looking for that you're just not aware of. So actually talking to users can really help give you that information. So user testing, and then there's also user interviews and group sessions and things like that can give you a really good picture.
So can I just take a little step backwards? You mentioned polls, and I think we've all been bombarded over the years with pop-ups. Things, you're on a particular web page and this thing pops up. Is there any particular guidance with regard to how many questions you could ask in a pop-up and when you should ask those questions? Because I think there's a very delicate balance here with wanting to find out more to offer a much more personalised experience versus being a blooming nuisance because these things keep popping up asking you questions. Any ideas, Sandeep?
I think the number of questions for me is more related to the value that asking the questions provides. You don't want to poke someone at multiple stages in the journey and say, are you seeing what you need? No? Okay, cool. And do nothing with the information, but ask them every page. On the other hand, I've seen things like guided selling where, you'll launch an entire quiz and there'll be 10, 15, 20 questions, various, pick this design and colors and price range and, essentially glorified filtering, I guess, but, asking people considerable number of questions, but the value they then see on the end of it is, here's something very specific to what I'm after, and I don't need to spend the next 10 minutes browsing through the site, clicking through images. I've told them specifically what I want, and I've got back something very direct and to the point.
So that seems to work well in travel websites where you're actually looking for a specific type of holiday in a specific place. But I'm questioning the fact whether that would work, say, for instance, in a retail environment, say, for instance, buying clothes. You've got to find an awful lot of questions for people to get it very specific. So perhaps is it different for different industries, or is it different for different parts of the customer journey? Or is there just a kind of, we should just do it a little and perhaps a little and often?
I have seen it work in retail. Halfords, for example, if you go to buy a bike, they'll ask you a good few questions and allow you to say, I'm looking for a bike that is for children in the mountains, or, kind of helping you add layers of filters on top of things. Seen it happen in a few other retail environments as well. Clothing, I've not seen so much of. Although even with clothing, right? If you were to be able to tell a website, I'm looking very specifically for beachwear because I'm going to Ibiza. It's probably going to get trashed. It can't be too expensive.
I could just see that question. Are you going to get trashed?
Yeah. So there's a specific look I'm sure that people go for when they're out there. Well, maybe one of a couple. Either something that looks very expensive or something that looks very bright and colourful and it's nice to be out in the sun and snapping pictures in. So it's, these kind of questions, if you're able to ask them in a specific way, even for clothing, imagine not having to click through endless pictures and navigations and all that stuff, and just a few very well thought out questions in a decent journey. They could get you there so much faster.
Yeah.
I think with clothing as well, the filters on the site and the navigation with the product listing pages you have are kind of act as a natural set of questions. So it's making sure you've got the right ones. So for example, on a clothing site, if you're looking for an outfit for a wedding, you'll see some sites they've actually got a category just for wedding guests because they know that a lot of their customers during the summer months are going to be looking for wedding outfits. So it's things like that. Whereas if you're kind of trying to get an idea of what users, even if it's just a one-off poll, just to try and understand what you're here for, and then think, well, do the product listing pages I have and the categories I have on the site align with that? And if there's a big demand for people that say, I'm here for a wedding dress, then have you got a wedding dress category so they can easily reach it? So I'm kind of doing it in a more subtle way of just making sure you've got the right buckets of products on the site available for users to filter down to what they're looking for.
So the other thing that I think you mentioned there was user surveys. Now, I'm not sure if we were specifically talking about online surveys or actually offline surveys, which many companies operate. Many years ago, Sandy, you probably remember, we used a consumer psychologist to do some seminars for us. And they were saying that generally, if you ask people a question, it's the way you ask the question with regard to the response you get back. So is it that companies may be doing lip service to that, or is it that it's more sophisticated? Because you're kind of in, with REO, you're in that kind of space. Is it more specific so you can actually get down to the nitty gritty? It's not just, well, what are you interested in kind of questions. How do you actually pose those questions to an offline panel, if you like?
Yeah, I think you have to be very careful about how you word the question and make sure especially if you're having a multiple choice answer, if you've not thought of one of the biggest options there could be, then you're going to get an answer that reinforces what you already believe potentially. So I think at the beginning, maybe using some kind of open-ended questions just to get an idea of what the main categories are, and then having an other section where you can still capture things that users feel don't fit in with the options you've given them. But yeah, you do have to be very careful about how you word the question to make sure that you are getting a true picture back rather than just, as I say, reinforcing existing opinion.
It's interesting because my wife is one of these back-end consumer kind of people for Marks and Spencer's. So she gets sent a survey every month with regard to her shopping habits, what she likes, what their promotions are doing and things like that. And, my wife reads them all out to me. And I tend to see that they're asking the questions so that they get the kind of answers that they want back, which are positively associated rather than negatively associated. And I'm not sure it's in particularly in Marks and Spencer's, but there's generally always about the positives of things rather than being able to understand the real feelings of the consumer.
Yeah. It's like, how much do you love us on a scale of 1 to 10?
That sounds just about right, actually. I can't comment on the Marks and Spencer's one, but that's generally what we see. So we've kind of gauged the fact that there's plenty of ways to be able to try and understand your audience from a website visitor, and you could probably gauge a lot from that analytics and get a lot from where they've come from and using cookies that are planted inside their website already. But how do we know what to say to people at each individual phase of that customer journey? Because that must seem a pretty momentous task to be able to say, okay, we're going to personalize our site now. Oh, we've got 370 pages on our website or 1,000 pages on a website. How do we go about personalising that with all the different computations that might be available for that kind of customer that's in there? How do we put people into buckets? Sandeep?
Yeah, it's always about bucketing people, but the question is where you have the dialogue and exactly, what you're trying to achieve from it. I've seen good advice like pick 3 or 5 big segments and try and focus on those. Studies we've done in the past have bucketed people into 6 or 7 categories and personalized very well. The research is almost the big thing. It doesn't matter how big or small the buckets are, but starting there is absolutely fine. The question is, how do you have the conversation with them? Where do you have it with them? It doesn't need to be on every single page of the site. But, if people are landing on a homepage, which, given even a very simple look at data, like the entry pages Sarah was talking about, if someone lands on a PDP looking at microphones, I was talking to this electronics retailer and saying if someone comes looking for a branded microphone and the first page is a PDP, you know exactly why they're there. So why then try and sell them speakers if they click on the logo and end up on the homepage when, you know, they're very clearly there for something else instead of showcasing great microphone tech? It's these kind of things, you know, you got to pick your moments, you know, traffic pages that people go through a lot. You don't need to pick niche pages specifically unless they hurt conversion a lot, which again comes down to looking through analytics. Yeah, it's just picking your moments, I guess.
So you'd say perhaps, as opposed to trying to swallow the whole ocean, perhaps go and look at a few little tributaries and try and work on that first and see if that works, and test and see if it starts to deliver an increase in conversions, then move on to the next section and things like that.
Yeah, I'd almost start just to begin with saying, what information do we even have? You know, you might not have things granular enough on day one, you know, to make very hyper personalized journeys for tiny audiences. But you may have knowledge of people come here looking for something. And if it's an electronic site, like I mentioned, you know, they could do dozens of ranges of products, but a name brand microphone is no different in journey to a name brand speaker or a name brand something else. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's you just saying the buckets can have variables in them, which means that you can broaden the scope. But it's just trying to pick groups of users and saying someone's come here looking for this type of thing, not this specific thing, but this type of thing. How well does the site suit them? How well does it address the things that they really want? How well does it address the things that they're not so sure about?
And does price come into that, Sarah? Do you think where you can bucket it into, I'll use the example of microphones, you can spend £4,000 on a microphone, or you can spend $39.99 on a microphone. Do you actually think that price has a determining how you actually talk to that person when they go onto, not necessarily a landing page, but generally when they go onto a page inside your website?
Yeah, I think people who obviously want to spend more money are looking for quality over the cheapest deal. So I think that's where two sets of messaging can make a difference. If you're saying, "Oh, this is the best quality for the cheapest price," so you're very much going with the fact that it's a lower price item. But as you get higher up the scale with tech, you need to show how it's the best. You know, it's the best in the market. It's made, you know, a quality made product, and also how it's kind of, you know, the people who are chasing the latest thing, and that is part of them, is that they want the latest technology at all times, is tapping into that messaging as well. So I think, yeah, as Sandeep was saying earlier, the way you communicate a product, depending on how it's priced, is going to be very different.
I'm one of those technology people that chases technology, or used to be anyway. I'm less so now. I think I've got my ideal setup now. I don't need to go any further. But when you've got these kind of people, you've now got somebody on your website and they've maybe made a single purchase. But I think we all understand that the first purchase isn't necessarily a profitable purchase. How do you change that one-time customer into a loyal customer? And I take a step back to the old-fashioned way of doing it, and I'll give you an example where corner shop, Mr. Brown, who's the corner shop owner, Mrs. Jones walks in and say, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Jones, good to see you. How's young Billy," or whatever her son is? "Oh, he's fine." Has a conversation with her and says, "Oh, what did you do with that beef that you had last week?" And she'll perhaps say, "Oh, I stewed it, and Jack, my husband, he was really happy with it." And then the next time another customer comes in and say, "Oh, I don't know what to have to eat," she'll go, "Oh, we had Mrs. So-and-so in here. She had a lovely bit of beef. She did it this way, and she was really delighted with the results." That kind of thing, I think, is the ultimate personalisation. Trying to get that across into a loyalty program, and I call a loyalty program just people coming back to your website and continually purchasing, must be fairly challenging. Any ideas how we can make that happen?
I think it's kind of treating the users on the website in the same way that you treat an email list, for example. So all of the users on your site are all at different stages of their journey with you as a brand. They either have, you know, this is the first time they've heard of you, or, you know, they've bought once before, but maybe, not sure whether to buy again, or they're a repeat customer who loves what you do. So I think it's kind of tying the two together and making sure you're trying to identify those groups of users and speaking to them differently. So you gave the example of having a conversation with the user. So I think trying to kind of think about real world scenarios and how you would do it in person, and then trying to translate that onto the online.
One of the things that I think that when we try to persuade customers, persuade customers to make purchases and things like that, there's a difference between persuasion and motivation, and I think that's something that can be a very thin line. You can see actually you're trying to be able to motivate somebody to make a sale is very encouraging, but persuasion is more seen as a harsh kind of technique. Oh, buy now. You see lots of these websites out there saying special offer runs out in 20 minutes, or book your holiday in the next 15 minutes to secure your place. What's the balance in there? And I know it's probably going to be different for each industry. So Sandeep, you used the railway network a few minutes ago. What do you think? Is it specific to those kind of companies, or is it much more broad than that?
No, far more broad, I think. Persuasion, for me, is these kind of tactics like social proofing and urgency, where you kind of say, move quickly, we need you to hurry up and get things booked. And maybe legitimate reasons for it. If it's a cinema ticket, for example, once the show's sold out, you can't go to that one. And maybe, I had this over the weekend trying to find tickets over the bank holiday and just realised I wouldn't be able to make it because the cinemas were packed. But motivation for me is things like, if we take the hotel and holiday example, for example, it's saying, when you go, what are you looking for? And can you help the user envision themselves in that experience? So if it's a holiday and they're there with their children, all of these activities that may be there at the resort, or things to go visit and do, the hotel and the flight, for example, BA don't necessarily need to motivate you to book a flight, but what's the experience? Where are you going and why are you going there? And then why with BA versus Ryanair or EasyJet or someone else? It's that kind of differentiation. The same applies to clothing. A lot of people have shown with sneakers, like opening the box and seeing these fresh trainers all in their wrapping, and that kind of feeling when you get to dig into the box is the bit of anticipation people are after. But if all you have is the generic upfront product shot, which every retail site has, it's kind of not so much there. But if it's a picture either of digging into the box or someone being out in the shoes and looking good, that's the scenario people are trying to achieve and materialize from their head. And it's trying to help them, say, okay, this is the right thing to be doing. That for me is the motivation side. The persuasion would just be saying, come on, hurry up, it's good, we're good people, just buy from us, which is a bit cheap almost.
But there's another kind of what I would suggest it would fall into the potential persuasion, and that's the use of recommendations, product recommendations after you've made a purchase, or even while you're making a purchase. That can seem very kind of, oh, now you've bought this, now buy this. But it could also be very helpful. Sarah, how would you create that balance to understand that customer, that purchasing journey, to be able to make sure it's more of a motivational message rather than buy this, now buy that?
Yeah, I think it's like Sandeep was saying, tapping into the experience the user wants to have. So things like what is it saying about you as a person, or what is driving you? Like the example with EasyJet, like, I can't remember the exact phrase they use, but it's like, we're the generation that go off and do all these cool things. We go travel everywhere because we can. And tapping into the fact that...
As long as you've got a small size bag.
Yeah, as long as you can fit all your toiletries into a tiny sandwich bag. But yeah, so I think tapping into that thing of like, yeah, we're the generation that are taking full advantage of the cheap travel available to us, and we're going off and having all these adventures. So it's tying part of you and how you want to live your life in with that brand. So I think that's quite clever. Is that you're like, yeah, it's easy. I've got my login to that site now. I can go back and book travel really easily and go off whenever I want. So I think, yeah, trying to tap into the message of that service or product and how it helps you live the life you want to live.
So would you put recommendations into the bucket of personalisation?
Yeah, I would. I think when the recommendations are tailored based on what you've bought. So, for example, like in the example of the microphone, you've bought this microphone, you're probably also going to need this to go with it, or you might need this. So it's very tailored. Instead of just serving up a random selection of products to recommend next, you're actually saying, well, okay, well, what would a person who's just bought this thing need to go with it? In the example of retail, it's like, well, you've bought a new dress for this wedding. Do you also need a bag and shoes to go with it? So it's very trying to fit very tightly to what they've just bought and making inference from that about the scenario that they're buying for and trying to help them more with that, preparing for that event, say.
So one word that I've used many, many times on podcasts in the past, and I think it's incredibly difficult to come across on a website, is the word empathy. And empathy is taking what we've already said in this podcast so far, but making sure that person feels that you understand them. Any suggestions how we can deliver an empathetic approach with regard to, say, for instance, tone of voice or whatever it might be on a web page? Sandeep, any suggestions?
Yeah, there are frameworks out there. We have one in 10 as well, where you just look at a person and there are categories of questions that we should be asking about that type of user. What drives them? What do they want? What are they doing functionally when they interact with the product? What they're doing functionally when they're evaluating the product and looking to buy it? What drives them? What scares them? What frustrates them? These kind of human questions are things that you can then build empathy with. What motivates me when I'm buying a new TV? Well, is the picture good? Is the sound quality good? If it's a high-end TV, what motivates me? Something probably a little bit different to a budget TV, which you can put up in your bedroom or something. Big high-end TV for my living room. Cool, I'm probably watching some nice films on it, and I want that sort of at-home cinema experience. And if you understand that thing, you can then have a more human conversation with me where you say, if you buy this over that, here is the improvement. And, if I wandered into a store, to go back to what you said earlier, that kind of human experience of we can put these things side by side and actually point and explain things to you. So I was trying to work out how to do that online. That's a very human thing, whether you're looking at fridges or TVs, or it could be anything, clothes, where you pick up a few and you try them on, or you have a good look at them. It's understanding all of these questions that I mentioned and then trying to address any one of them, all of them, building journeys that really do address the positives of what people are after and what they're hoping for, and all the negatives along the way as well. If it's a train, what happens if they're cancelled? What happens if there's a strike? All these things people are worried about nowadays. And if you do manage to address them in a journey very clearly, and know that people aren't stranded and their plans aren't going to be abandoned, and if they have bought tickets to do something on the other end, there's something that we can do about that, and we can make sure no matter what, we do get them to where they need to be. That's a much more empathetic approach than just buy this ticket for this train, there's 5 seats left, which is the kind of journey and experience most people are used to today, and it's a bit crap, isn't it?
I've got my own example of an excellent customer experience and empathy, and it's a well-known shirt retailer. we probably all know who that is, who actually unequivocally say you can return this at any time in the next, I don't know how many months it is, but it's a fairly long time. You could have worn it, you could have not unpacked it, you could have unpacked it, looked at it, or whatever. They'll happily refund you. And that's kind of, when you've bought the product, it's telling you that. I think that's a kind of empathetic position that should be front and centre when you get to the website. And that sort of language makes you feel as though I'm making a decision here which I can be comfortable with, because I know it's not the final decision. Now, I know it's different for a train ticket and things like that. It might not be the same in all areas. But I think empathy oozes out when it's used, and it's used very rarely, I think, today. And I think that if it was possible to have more and more people using empathy within their websites, I think that would make the customer journey feel a lot more comfortable from the user's perspective as well.
I think the perspective you should take, though, is kind of an inverted one. So it's not saying we as a brand are able to offer a generous return policy. It's almost saying we recognize the problem before we put a solution forward. We recognize that when you're buying shirts, you might not realize that the second you put it on that it doesn't quite look right with the types of trousers that you wear out or go to work in, the jeans or whatever. We recognize things might not look right. They might not fit right once you're out, but if you're just trying it on for a second, you might think it's fine. And so we're giving you a generous return policy. And that becomes a proper conversation to have, instead of just bring it back whenever you want, which again, a lot of people just stick with the headline and not the why. The why is something I'd like to hear of. We recognize that you can have all these issues, and so we've thought about it and done something, positive for you.
Sarah, is there anything else that we've not covered on this? Because we're drawing this to a close. We've been nearly on for 40 minutes or so. Is there anything else that we've kind of missed that's really important when it comes to personalisation?
I think just to build on what Sandeep was saying about the things that's driving the user to buy that product. So an example would be in insurance, say. So everyone thinks that insurance is kind of a very similar thing, but I know there's been research done that shows that when you're buying car insurance, it's something you have to buy. It's a very functional product. Legally you have to have it, so you just want to get it done quickly. Whereas something like life insurance or pet insurance has got a much more emotional drive behind it. It's like you want to protect people or pets that you love, so it has a much more of an emotional connotation. And using the language, I think the use of language it comes down to, and is it correlating with the user's feeling about buying that product. So I think really thinking about the emotions that the user is experiencing and what's driving them to buy that product, and then making sure that your language is in line with that. And you mentioned also about the kind of the urgency and the persuasion and how users are approaching the product. So another example would be where a user has bought a service before, but they've had a bad experience. So they are now much less price sensitive and much more wanting to make sure that they're going to get a good service at the end of it, and they're willing to pay more to do that in some cases. So making sure you're tapping into both mindsets come into a product. It's like, are they looking for the cheapest price, or are they wanting to make sure that they'll actually get the service that they're being promised? So how is the user's experience, not just with your brand, but also with purchasing that product in the past? Is it something that they don't trust now, and so you need to restore their trust, or is it still purely a price-driven decision?
Yeah. Even on your insurance example there, Sarah, I've seen an insurer that has like we pay out on X amount of claims, which again is kind of that objection handling and going through that process. It's not just buying the insurance, which anyone can do, but it's saying, if I buy this, are they the type that will cause a real fuss if I ever have to claim, and dealing with that. So, yeah, kind of really relevant.
Yeah, looking at all the angles. And I think if there's, it's putting yourself in the position if you were going to try and convince this user why to go with you as a brand, just trying to think of all the angles you could possibly come up with about what the user might be thinking and how to address each one.
It's definitely that empathetic approach then, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Sandeep, anything else from you?
I think the one message I've been trying to get across everywhere I go at the minute is just like, a lot of people talk about one-to-one personalization as this goal and thing that they're chasing, and you ask them what they want through that process and say, oh, we just want this carousel to have better products in it, or we've done a form test and we just want the form to be the right type of form for people. Like, this is not personalization in the slightest. It's a slightly more relevant journey perhaps at most, but personalization is about people. It's about humans. It's this kind of human experience over user experience. And that's, the research is not difficult to do. The studies are not difficult. We've been through most of the questions you would ask here, the sorts of thinking points. None of it's difficult. You've just got to want to do it.
Sandeep, that's a great sentence on which to end. So, Sarah, Sandeep, thank you very much for your time. It's been very, very knowledgeable from my perspective, and I've been in the industry for some time as well. But it's been great. We'll no doubt speak again.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for having me. It's been
Sarah.
great talking to you. Thank you.